Welcome to the Art Studio Insights podcast, where we demystify the creative process and exchange ideas with career-minded artists. We are your hosts, Adriana M.A. and
Jackie Sanders. We're two emerging artists sharing forward the advice and business lessons we have learned along our journey. So if you're not already, please go ahead and subscribe. This will help other creatives like you find our podcast, and you will be notified when we launch a new episode every Tuesday. On today's episode, I am so excited because we're actually starting a new series of transition moments. So really focusing on stories of ourselves and other artists on those pivotal moments in your career where you make big shifts.
Yeah, and whether it's shifting jobs, maybe shifting what your dominant income stream, or simply your mindset, right? Regardless of what stage you're in. Sometimes we encounter that crossroads in our lives where it's like, okay, something's got to change.
Yeah, especially those transition moments where it's really changing everything you've ever known, some on a small scale, some on a larger scale. And they feel like these very monumental, scary decisions. But ultimately, these transition moments are those pivot points where hopefully getting more in the direction of where you want to be going long term.
So Jackie, speaking of transitions, what are the biggest transition moments in your art career?
So I feel like for me, there really were two pivot points. Growing up, as many artists are, I grew up painting, drawing. I was always creative, had a wonderful art program in my high school, which I think was very helpful in terms of influencing even concepts I'm exploring today. But from a career standpoint, the biggest shifts really came after college. So I majored in art in college, went to Virginia Tech and absolutely loved it. But really shifting from the academia art school bubble that I lived in and then shifting to the real world of what does actually being a fine artist in the real world look like. That was a really hard shift for me. And then once I had my day job, really going into, okay, I'm making money, I'm an employee of a small company, going from that employee mindset where you're told what to do and you're given your tasks and your responsibilities and assessed on how good you're doing them, to the business owner mindset of, this is my art business that I'm building. There's no one on your back making sure that you hit deadlines. There's no one telling you if you're doing a good job or not. You just have to have that confidence and that basically like willpower to push through and really prioritize it. And so shifting that mindset from an employee to a business owner was my second really big pivot.
So you went from wearing one hat as an employee to wearing all the hats as a small business owner.
Exactly. And it's definitely beneficial, but that's a real tough mindset to go like shift to. So that was a huge transition.
Well, I want to dive a little bit more into both transition points, but let's start with the art school one. So what did it look like when you left art school and entered the quote unquote real world?
The quote real world. Yeah. So I honestly did not do great with that transition. I am definitely a type A personality. I love school. I love learning. I like being told what to do because then you have a checklist and you can complete it. And so, I mean, all during school, I loved taking classes and learning as much as I could, especially in the environment in the college that I was at. There were so many opportunities. There were everyone in your classes are around your same age. They have similar interests. They have all these opportunities and internships. And it was one of these places where you truly are just in this bubble, for better or for worse, of nurturing and care and, yes, constructive criticism with your art, but it's really this place that's unlike anything else. And so all of a sudden you graduate and it's super exciting, but then you're just out on your own. And especially because I moved to Raleigh. I'm from Baltimore originally, went to Virginia Tech in Blacksburg, Virginia, and then moved to Raleigh. So just working my way down south, I guess. And so I really only knew like two people in the city when I first moved here. So going from a world that I had built up in a college town for 5 years, because I got my master's there as well, to then going to a city where I knew no one, like didn't have an immediate support system there. No one keeping you accountable to making art on your own, also trying to figure out all of the adult pivot life things of finances and paying like way more for rent than you do in a college town and all those things. And so I think especially from an art standpoint, it was really difficult in terms of you don't have that community that you come from. I took that for granted, I think, especially going from high school was super tight knit and then college, and then basically having to recreate that completely from scratch was super, super difficult. And I just felt really isolated and honestly even burnt out creatively after like pushing and going for multiple years, where you have like 5 different paintings going on. You have all these different art classes and they give you prompts and they tell you what to make. Then it's okay, it's up to you, even though you feel like, oh, is all my best artwork behind me? And that's when like all of that self-doubt comes in, and there's no one there to like combat the self-doubt unless you actively try to squash it down.
Yeah. Did you feel like the amount of paintings you were doing suddenly just shrinked? You know, like for a class, maybe they were asking you, hey, this semester you got to do, I don't know, 5 paintings. And then suddenly you're on your own trying to balance, you know, real world responsibilities, adulting. And then it's like in the same amount of time, maybe that shrank down to 1 painting. Like, was it that
Oh
kind of
yeah.
impact?
And I'd say honestly, even more drastic. Like so in my studio program, we had a senior exhibition. So like March of my senior year, you've known it since your freshman year, you're going to have this senior show. And so it's a very unique, as you know, Adriana, like it's a very unique experience to make artwork knowing that it's going to be on display.
Mhm.
And that's a very different mindset than now after college at that point. I'm like,
No
there's
deadlines.
no end goal in mind besides simply making the work. And I think that was kind of that transition in mindset as well that I had to learn after art school, because given the prompts, and again, being such a type A checklist type person, I'd be like, great, I can make this artwork to fit this prompt super well and be very strategic with it. And I still like it and was able to develop my style and explore a bunch of different mediums, which is typically a huge benefit of art school, is like you have these professors who are experts in these mediums and you get to learn directly from them. But then when there's no more assignments, when no one's telling you what to make, what do I make? And I really kind of have an identity crisis as an artist looking back on it now. And I haven't thought about that in a long time in terms of like, what do I actually like? Or what did I just think was more elevated than something else? And all of these weird mindset shifts that I had, you just make decisions on your own, which was very unique experience. And so especially going back to my senior show, so you have this senior show and I was like going hard for my senior show. I
Full
actually
speed ahead.
full speed, which if anyone listening or knows me in person, that's kind of my motivation for a lot of things. If I'm doing something, I go all in tunnel vision, which can be problematic at times. But so you basically had like 2 semesters, you had the fall and spring to make your senior show. And so I made this entire series of work my fall semester. Over winter break, decided I'm actually not as connected with that series as I thought. I'm going to completely
Oh
change it.
no.
So it's January. My show is the first week of March.
Oh
And I'm
no.
like, I was talking to my mentor and I'm like, yeah, I think I'm just going to like scrap that whole series. And because I was already done, he's like, are you crazy? And I'm like, no, like I don't want to display work that I don't feel super connected to. And like I built this event up so much in my head, which it was an amazing experience and so rewarding. But I was like, I am
But
shifting my entire series, but I got so burned out.
mm,
And so I literally, and this is not even exaggerating. So I graduated 2016. I don't think I painted again at least 2 years. Like,
not even a
nope,
sketch,
nope,
nothing.
nothing. I
Wow.
still had all my art supplies. I like had set stuff up, maybe like craft type stuff, like
Yeah, but that's
making
not the same. I mean, it
not the
helps.
same.
It helps to keep you from getting
Right.
too rusty, but that's not quite the same
Right. And I think
thing.
that that was the biggest thing of um really, and also of course after you graduate you're transitioning into the real world like we talked about. You're transitioning into adjusting to so many aspects of your life, yet alone your creative practice. So it's like meeting new friends and getting established at my day job, which was very time demanding. And so trying to just get my footing in other aspects of my life, honestly, making art wasn't even on my mind because I was like, I just need to make money. And at that point, I didn't think that art was an avenue that I could do that. So I was like, I'll like think about that when I have time,
Hmm.
which is like the death comment or death mindset to have because like you're never just gonna have, oh great, my to-do list is done and now I have time. Like the to-do list is never done. And I think it took me a few years to realize that, like, oh, time is just going to keep passing. And the longer I'm not working on my artwork, then the longer it's just wasted time that that I'm not spending towards this larger goal that I knew in my gut I wanted at some point. But I'm like, one day, till you actually start taking action on it. Crazy concept.
Yeah, I think a lot of people go through the same thing, and it's kind of that, oh, when I leave the job in the afternoon, I guess I'll do something, or on the weekends, because you don't work 7 days a week. At
Right.
least most people don't, right? And yeah, it just comes to that point where you just keep putting it off because it's like, if I don't have 3 hours to paint, what's the point? And you may never have 3 hours to paint unless you stop
Right.
watching Netflix, which, but then you need
True.
Netflix to recharge, or TV or whatever, or even sports. You need that time to recharge from the stress of the job. So then you end up
Right.
not having the time for creativity unless you make the time. But yeah, no, I'm with you. I've heard that many times. I've been on that boat before of like, oh yeah, when I find time, I'll do X, and that
Right.
time never
It's
really
never gonna
comes,
happen.
or not very
Yeah.
often, anyways.
And I think that's
Yeah,
an interesting mindset too, in terms of like, it's funny looking back and so much, I feel like even today, of a lot of people's identity is linked to
their
what they do
job.
for their job. And that's been a conversation I've had with not even just artists, but like friends over the past year, especially with the pandemic and shutdown. I feel like it's really kind of forced people to like look inward and like, okay, when you take potentially, if people started working remotely, it takes the office out of their identity and they don't have these social coping mechanisms to avoid, okay, I'm just have all these things in my life as a coping mechanism for potentially not feeling fulfilled at your job. And so once you remove all those, it's like, well, who am I? What do I value? What do I prioritize? And it really shines a light on, oh, I have not been prioritizing the things that truly light me up, the things that truly give me energy. And I think that was part of that second shift that I had, where I was working at a day job and realistically I was just putting in so many hours. I was like, it was a hourly wage job. I was not getting health benefits and I
Oh
truly
no.
didn't love what I was like, I loved what I was doing. And I think looking back, I just justified to myself working so hard because as a student and as a type A go-getter, it's like I prided myself on my work ethic and honestly still do, especially growing up as an athlete. It's like, if you show up on time, you're late. If you show up 5 minutes early, you're on time. Like as soon as practice starts, like start running sprints. You have to earn your breaks. Like it's all of these mindset things to really instill good work ethic. But like I said earlier, like I just tunnel vision and do things to the extreme. So I'm like, I'm not just gonna be 10 minutes early. I'm gonna be 25 minutes early. Like I'm not gonna just do overtime when it's needed. I'm gonna stay here like literally all night and work because
Yeah,
then
but
my value is in how hard I work, which got very toxic very, very quickly.
yeah, because like what I'm hearing from you saying this is, unfortunately, you did not apply that same set of parameters to your creativity and your art. Because if you had, then it would have been like, I'm not working 50 hours a week on this job. I'm working exactly 40 because that extra 10 is for my art. So that just,
Right.
it just didn't happen that way. I mean, obviously hindsight is 2020, right? But
Right. And I
that's
think that,
an interesting point.
yeah. And because for the first few years, of course, as I feel like it's kind of instilled in the workforce of like, pay your dues, prove that you're a hard worker. And like, yes, to an extent, like you want to build your professional reputation. I don't think you necessarily have to like prove yourself to anyone, but realistically, if they're giving you a paycheck, you want them to think you're a hard worker, think that you're like providing value to the company. But after being there like for a few years, I really had that realization of, wait a minute, like I am burning myself so thin by working so much. Like, for what? What is this bigger purpose that I'm working towards? Especially being a smaller company, I was like, I don't want to own the company one day. I don't even necessarily like, I liked the industry, but I didn't want to necessarily stay pigeonholed in that industry. So I'm like, for being a goal-oriented person, I didn't have a long-term goal at that point. So I'm like, what am I doing? Just gonna like coast through the next 40 years until I retire on an hourly wage job with no health benefits? Like, that was kind of this wake up transition moment. And that's what really made me think about, okay, why am I feeling so unfulfilled? Why do I feel like I'm really seeking purpose right now? And I never had that in college because, again, there was always a goal. And so really had to sit down and be honest with myself, like, what do I want out of life? And so prioritizing my art was really the biggest thing. And that's when I started like rebuilding, okay, these support systems that I had in college in the real world. And that's literally when I met you, Adriana, at that art critique.
Well, I was about to ask you too. So as I'm hearing, like, okay, to recap real quick, right? So art, high school, college,
Yeah.
all the things, all the network, enter the real world where we're just going to call it as an adulting, non-creative job for purposes of our conversation, right?
Right.
Um, was there something that triggered you though? That's the part I'm waiting to hear for. Was there something like you read a book, you heard a podcast, I don't know, you saw an Instagram account and you're like, oh my gosh, this person's like a millionaire taping bananas to a duck, with duct tape to the wall. Like, was there something that you're just like, that's it, I gotta change? Like, was there anything that just triggered, or was it more of a gradual awakening? Because it could be either. Or was it a little more gradual of like, starting to put things together? What was it more for you?
Yeah. I definitely had pivot points of a like aha awakening moments as I got the ball rolling, but I think it really was gradual in the beginning. I and especially back then used to be a huge podcast listener, because with my job I could listen to music or podcasts while I was working.
Which is
So
awesome.
which was great. And again, it was like another benefit of the job. So like, who am I to want more? Who am I to like even think that I could do more than this? Like, definitely like a self-esteem mindset shift. But I was just binging podcasts like crazy. And so I think it was almost like content overload, to the point where it wasn't one aha epiphany podcast, but really focusing on business, entrepreneur, art type podcasts. That was okay. Like, I'm going to do my research before I even admit to myself or anyone else that this is really what I want. And I was like, just dipping my toe in of like, I'm very much a person that takes calculated risks. I'm like, I am not a super just like jump into the
Off the
wind and
edge.
see
Yeah.
what happens. I'm like, I'm going to lay a solid foundation of research, assess if I'm going to be successful. Like, I have confidence in myself, but I'm not going to set myself up for failure per se, especially with something that big. So I think it was really just listening to a lot of different podcasts, hearing a lot of people's stories. And then as I started committing to my art, and I think a big thing, especially from an art creation standpoint, in 2020, I was like, okay, this is going to be my year. Like, end of 2019, I was starting to like I said, went to art critiques and met you, was making some pieces here and there and experimenting, really trying to figure out. I tried returning back to pieces that I had made in college. And it was definitely that moment that I know a handful, like a lot of artists probably relate to, where I was like, this piece used to have so much energy to me. It was so charged and raw and like authentic. And I had such a connection to it. And
And
so I
now?
tried to go back to that style. And I'm like, no, it's dead. Like it is gone. I have no inspiration left. Like, who am I? I'm such a fraud. Like, of course, mindset shifts, just going down the rabbit hole. Like, how did I even make this? I don't even feel connected to it. Like, I just need to throw it away. It's terrible. So I realized I could not go back to what I was doing and really just had to rebuild. And so I was starting making new work and I was like, okay, I want this to be sustainable. I don't want to get overwhelmed. Starting in 2020, it's going to be like, I'm
Best
just
year
gonna,
ever.
best year ever. Literally, like, I'm going to be in my first market. I'm going to go to all these different markets and museums, attend all these events, which we all know how that went. But from an art creativity and like production standpoint, I was like, okay, I don't necessarily even, it honestly didn't even cross my mind to track like how many paintings to make. Because again, that's something I never learned in art school. You just had deadlines that were like 2-3 weeks out and you met them. I was like, I don't know how quote unquote real life painting timelines look like. Will it take me a week? Will it take me 5 months? I don't know. So I was like, okay, I don't know how to quantify that, but being again, goal oriented, I'm like, I'm going to do one drawing a day, just one drawing at very minimum. If I do nothing else, I'll do one drawing. And then I can at least know that I'm taking strides to something bigger. I have no idea what yet. I can't even think about it, but at least by the end of this year, I'll have these drawings and they'll become something. And I think that's really circling back to this very long-winded answer. I think committing to that was really the reawakening being built and also instilling that confidence in me again of like, okay, like I do know how to do it. It's kind of like the training wheels on a bike. Like, all right, like pedal with one foot, you get back in the motion. And really a lot of the goals that I had set earlier in 2020 were like knocked out of the park within like the first 3-4 months of 2020. In terms of like getting in my first exhibition happened in February when like that was my big goal for 2020. I want one piece on display in Raleigh. And that was so unobtainable in my mind in 2019. I was like, no way. Like, this is the real world. This is such a big thing. Like, I was like, I felt like I could, like, as many college kids do, like conquer the world coming out of college. And then I was like, oh man, this is a really big pond and I'm a very small fish. And so, so like being able to get in a first exhibition in February after just like 20 days of doing daily drawings, that kind of like, I think sparked that awakening in me of like, oh, this is possible. Yeah. And kind of showed me that even what I perceived as a big lofty dream, I was like, you're thinking way too small. You need to level up. And I think that was a like awakening moment of, all right, let's reassess. Then it was just a wild year after that.
Yeah. So 2020 was basically when you started applying some of that Taipei, full steam ahead, and basically doing that while you still had your other job though. So, bring us from 2020 up till today. How did you start balancing the day job, like juggling the day job and the art business that you started building then? Well, which at first I'm sure wasn't a business. It was like more art goals, but then it started morphing, as the year went by.
Yeah, definitely. And I think definitely acknowledging that is a great point because especially from like a social media aspect, like most people that followed either like my Facebook page or Instagram page, I started posting more or sharing more about my artwork. And a lot of people would message me being like, oh, did you quit your job to become a full-time artist? That's great, blah, blah. I'm like, oh no, I have a full-time day job. And they'd be like, what? That's crazy. Just because it is very hard to prioritize something that you love a lot. It's hard to prioritize it a lot while you have a day job. And I was stuck in that for so long. So the biggest thing that I had to do really shifting that mindset was making the time even when I felt like I didn't have the time. And a lot of that came down to me. I kind of had to acknowledge where I was and what I was allowing to happen in my life, especially in terms of my day job. Like, okay, I don't necessarily have to offer to work 15 hours of overtime every single week. Like, is this possible within the day job hours so I can spend that time on my art business? And a big thing for me too was setting up sustainable systems so that I could do it all, having to be very intentional with how I used my time. And there was one quote, I guess one podcast that I had listened to. I wish I could remember at this point, but they all start to like gel together once you hear all these stories. But someone was basically talking about their morning routine, which I would get up in the morning and like work out before I went to my day job, which is like a great way to start the day. But one thing that someone had told, or the podcast had mentioned, was when they were transitioning out of their day job and starting their own entrepreneur business, then they said, I need to wake up early in the morning because I want to make sure that I prioritize myself before I prioritize anyone else. And that was a big aha moment for me in terms of really evaluating where my energy was going. I would like wake up, immediately start working, and I wouldn't get off until like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 p.m. at night. Sometimes, like if a client came in last minute and had a tight turnaround time, it was like, oh, well, you're staying late. Hope you didn't have plans. And it was just one of those situations, which like, I loved what I was doing. And so I definitely was the first to volunteer because I did enjoy it. And I love working hard and I find it really fulfilling to finish a project. But it's not sustainable long-term. And so I really had to say, okay, I cannot control that right now. That is a situation that, okay, is out of my hands. So basically I had to go in with the understanding of, if I need to wake up earlier and paint for like 2-3 hours before I even go to my day job, because by the time I come home, I don't know what time I'm coming home. I don't know what my energy levels will be. I was like on my feet the whole time too. And then that I think is really another way that I was able to like prove to myself, in addition to the daily drawings, of this is sustainable. And this is something that I get fired up about like first thing in the morning.
Yeah, I like that. Are you still waking up early to do work, or is it a little bit easier? Because I know before you had a commute with your previous day job, you know, so that was different, and you had to be there on site and then stay late if necessary. And I think it would, you know, sometimes all the extra hours and whatnot. How about now?
Right. So I think now I don't as often. I try at least 1 or 2 days a week to get into the studio early. So at that time, yeah, I was getting up early, had a commute to my job and then would work a lot. So I knew that was within my control. And then I also, over 2020, you and I both got our studios in downtown Raleigh, which is great, but that's also another commute to factor in. I was no longer waking up and immediately going to the second bedroom of my apartment to paint. I'd have to drive downtown. And also I was able to get another day job that I really, really love. I work in marketing and doing social media content creation, which is amazing. And one of the many benefits of working for this company is that it is very flexible in terms of the hours. And we work from home. So I can work from the studio, I can work at my apartment. And that type of flexibility makes it so that I don't have to wake up at 4 a.m. in paint because I don't have to be in the office by 8:30, which is really, really helpful just for my sanity. But I think if I were still working in an office day job, I probably would still be waking up early in the morning, simply because your time isn't your own when you have to go in somewhere and have a set schedule. So I love having the flexibility now, and that I was able to really like choose that when I was applying for other jobs, wanting to pivot And I think that was super helpful too, in that I knew I wanted a day job career shift. I thought about trying to stick it out in terms of that, my old day job, for as long as possible before I could launch my art business. But really having the time flexibility and being able to work from the studio is a huge benefit of my current day job. Because like we were saying earlier too, with like building sustainable systems, or my sanity systems, as I call it. There's certain things that I do every day, every week, every month in terms of my business that have really allowed me to build that foundation for my art business during the time where I'm transitioning out of being an employee into the business owner, which is really nice.
And now you're basically both.
Yeah. And I think that was a really tough shift to go into mentally, because even at my old day job, I thought about, all right, how long can I stick this out till I can make my art a full-time income for me? But I really realized I needed the flexibility. I needed to be able to accommodate my art schedule or art events if I wanted to go to an opening or be in the studio. And really for having to come to terms with, it's probably just like the inner critic stigma talking of, oh, well, only real artists are full-time artists. So if you have a day job, if you have any type of other income, you're not committed enough. You're not intense enough, kind of. And again, that's probably just the tunnel vision, go all in mindset. But really having to learn, especially early on when I was even thinking, is this possible? Of really allowing myself to think about, yes, I can fully build an art business while having a day job. It is totally possible. And I think coming from a situation where I was working 40, 50, 60 hours a week, honestly, even during the holiday times, I would literally clock like 80, 85 hours.
Wow.
And I was still able to prioritize my art during that time. So coming from such the extreme, one side of the situation, knowing like it is possible. And I truly, as an artist who's building her business, I honestly feel like it can be a strength at points, because I know long-term, this is the art business I want to be building. This is the community I want to be building. This is the income streams, which we talk about in other episodes, but I'm able to do that without the pressure of having to have that pay my apartment rent or pay my Wi-Fi bill. So like I can really build these systems up and build them the way I want to long term without needing those immediate sales and those immediate wins, because I think those are very different mindsets when you're thinking short term versus long term. And I enjoy what I'm doing for my day job. So I like having the balance of both.
Yeah, it takes some of that selling pressure off. So that's
Right.
really good. But because for some folks that pressure could in fact kill their creativity. So there is that.
Yeah. And I
But
think that would definitely be it for me. I would just be like deer in a headlights. I instantly can't do anything. So it's
no,
nice having the pressure to
there
take
are
off.
ways. Yeah,
Yeah.
there are ways, but we'll talk
True.
about that at some other time. But I do want to start wrapping this up a little bit and
Yeah.
ask you, do you have any takeaways, any advice that you would give, other artists that find themselves in a similar situation that you did? Either they're coming out of art school or they're stuck in that day job that they don't really like and are considering, can I balance having the two or just solo? Or, do you have any words of wisdom that you're
Yeah.
willing to share with us?
Yeah, of course. I think the biggest one for me, which was always emphasized in college, but I think also carries over for your entire life, really, is to find good mentors, whether in person or especially virtual mentors these days. Find someone on YouTube that you really admire that is sharing content. Find someone who does a podcast or even like Instagram live videos. Find someone that you can truly look up to as to like what is possible, and make sure it's someone that you want to be where they are. One of the biggest pieces of advice that I got in college that has stuck with me to this day is, if you're going to climb the ladder, make sure it's leaned up against the right wall. And I think that's a big moment for me when in the past, I felt super stuck and I was just priding myself on working. Like, I'm just going to keep climbing this ladder because that's what I'm supposed to do. I'm going to follow instructions. And I'm like, I'm going in this direction. Like, I don't even want to be on top of this wall. That looks miserable. I actually want to be over here. Let me divert paths. So make sure you find mentors that maybe have done something that you want to do one day that can really guide you in becoming the artist or business owner or just creative that you want to be. And then I think the other piece of advice I'd have to give would be a little bit of tough love, that I had many moments of that on my journey, and really having to say, okay, rather than saying, oh, I don't have time for X or I don't have time for Y, rephrase it and tell yourself, X is not a priority right now.
Mm-hmm.
And see how that feels different, because realistically, we all do have commitments. We all do have things that we're responsible and other people we're responsible for in our day-to-day lives, but we all have the same amount of time. And ultimately, every choice that you make in terms of how you spend your time is in fact a choice. So there are definitely, even now, some days where I'm like, is making a painting a priority, or is going home, cooking dinner and watching Survivor a priority? Some nights Survivor wins. And yes, I am addicted to Survivor. It's like a show I will binge watch. But it's like, and that is okay. But I think when you convince yourself, oh, I don't have time, and then you still just watch Survivor for 4 hours, okay, Survivor is a priority over making art. If you're okay with that, that's fine. But being aware of that, I think, is the biggest thing. And don't convince yourself that you don't have the time, because realistically, if you don't have the time, you have to make the time, because you deserve to see like your biggest dreams come true. And honestly, like the rest of the world wants to see the artwork that you have to make. So the world deserves to see your art and for you to prioritize the time to make it.
Yeah, I mean, that ties in so well to what we were talking about earlier. Yeah, if you say you don't have time, it's like, yeah, what can you give up then? How
Right.
long are you spending on that Amazon shopping spree or on
Yeah.
Netflix? Like, chances are there is something. We're not saying give it up, people. We're saying chances are there is something you can cut back on, even if it's just a little bit, to make time for that art. But
Right.
soapbox conversation for a different day, for sure. Actually, we do have an episode on time tracking, which I'm sure we went on the soapbox with that same
Yes.
topic. So that's definitely a great takeaway of, yeah, you have to find the time. If it's a priority for you, you got to treat it
Yeah.
like a priority. And then I like your takeaway about the mentors, or for some people, they might just think of them as role models. Whether you're
Right.
interacting with them directly or not, it might just be a one-way street, and that's fine too. But
Right.
someone to look up to, and with art too, there is no path you can replicate that somebody else did. It's just the way it
Oh, yeah.
works, unlike some other careers. But
Right.
there's, you can still get ideas from somebody else's path and see how it fits yours, and how to move up and level up your art and your art business. So these are some great takeaways.
Yeah, it's definitely
Um,
things that like people told me along my journey, and I just wish I really listened to them more. And especially with mentors, like you can't have too many. So I've had amazing mentors in my life, especially within college, many that I still keep in touch with today. And it's great, especially now making my artwork, being able to like reconnect with them and share their stuff on social media, but especially virtual mentors. Like it makes so many people so much more accessible, and they're putting content out to help other people, to share their story, to hopefully save you time. And that's one thing that we talk about so much on the podcast, is like, if we can share one thing that will save some artist a rabbit hole night researching X, Y, and Z, because we had those nights. We had a month where I'm tunnel vision on this thing just to realize I'm going towards a dead end. Like if we can save other creatives that time, that's so valuable to us. And we just want to help share it forward with people.
Absolutely. And all right. So if you've heard our podcast, you know we're both kind of bookworms. So this question
Yes.
had to come up. Jackie, any book recommendations or any creatives that are thinking about transitioning or are feeling stuck in their current day job situation and are wondering, what that other, alternate path would look like?
Yeah, so there have been so many pivotal books that I have read. We are both definitely bookworms and podcast nerds. So, but two really came to mind when I was thinking about that mindset shift of like what really is possible. So the first one is 4 Hour Work Week by Tim Ferriss. Normally there's like a big palm tree on the cover if you're watching this on YouTube, but I took the cover off. And so the 4 Hour Work Week was really helpful in terms of really making me look at my business processes of like what is possible, streamlining systems and really establishing what are those sanity systems that I need to have in place for my business to leave more room for creativity, which was super, super helpful and really getting into that business owner mindset versus the employee mindset. Another one that is super amazing. I'm actually about to start reading it again. I'm going to try to read at least once a year. Is Art, Money, Success by Maria Brophy. And so she really breaks down, if you're a visual artist, I definitely recommend it because she really breaks down income streams in terms of thinking strategically about how you realistically can make money with your art, everything from art licensing to doing events. And it really just kind of opened my eyes to, whoa, this really is possible. Like she is such a businesswoman. Her husband's the painter. He paints on surfboards and they have like a very specific niche brand. And then she comes from the business world. So it's cool having their two minds together, and how she perceives the art world and applies business practices into the arts. So 4 Hour Work Week by Tim Ferriss and Art, Money, Success by Maria Brophy are definitely non-negotiables for me.
Those sound really good. I'm gonna have to. I've read the 4 Hour Work Week a long, long time ago, but I'm definitely gonna have to check Maria Brophy's book at some point. That sounds really, really interesting. So, with that, we have wrapped this episode. This has been amazing. I hope you have all enjoyed it as much as we have, learning a little bit more about those moments, where we go from, being in this static place to, seeing the light at the end of the tunnel and saying, okay, that's it. I need to make a change. And, kind of as we work our way through it. So I hope you really enjoyed this episode.
Yeah, and thank you so much for letting me share my story and my transition moments. I'm sure we will have many more in the future, but if any of my transition moments can help someone else out there have their transition moment, then it is definitely worth it. So I appreciate everyone listening. And as always, both of our blogs will be linked in the show notes where you can find notes from today's episodes, as well as links to both of these books and links to other podcasts that are released every Tuesday.
Yeah, and if you want to stay connected with us between episodes, share what you have learned, what you liked about today's episode, which of course was a little bit different, but hopefully you loved it too. You can follow us both on social media at Amate Art on all platforms.
And I'm at J Sanders Studio on all platforms. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.